Thank you. I am so very honored that all of you have come out to listen to this talk tonight, especially the princess who has championed the new work that I have been talking about for the last 15 years. And it takes a brave person to go out against the forces of the world and think something different. And so I very much appreciate that. Thank you very much. What I'd like to start off with is basically begin with the fact that I got into medicine because I didn't believe in spirit. I believed in the mechanical body and the molecules and the chemistry of life. And through my research, which I will describe tonight, it transformed my entire life because I was teaching medical students the conventional understanding of life, and my research told me a completely different story, and I had to step outside of medicine because they did not want to hear what the new science is. And that was back in 1980. But since then, science has come all the way up to express and realize that there is a new foundation about how life works. And why I love to present this is because it reveals how truly powerful every one of you is. Every one of you has the power to control your health, your life, and your destiny. And I would like to show you that on a scientific level. So if I can begin with, we'll start with I'm going to talk first about the biology of belief, and after the break I'm going to talk about this one, and this one is very critical because the world is in a state of evolution right now, and that we're facing crises that are causing us to change the way we live, or we're going to go extinct. And so this is very critical and very timely. But the first one is the book about your personal belief, and this is about the belief of civilization. So they're both about belief and how belief creates the world that we live in. I'm a cellular biologist, and I talk about cells. And people say, but what is that relationship to me? Well, here's the first fact. When you look in the mirror and you see yourself, and you see a single human looking back, that's a misperception. Because in truth, you're not a single anything. You are made out of 50 trillion cells. It's the cells that are the living entity. When you say me, you're talking about a community of 50 trillion cells. So I want to talk about the nature of a cell. And number one, not only do you have 50 trillion cells, but most importantly is this, is that every cell essentially has the same functions that are in your human body. Most every cell in your body has a respiratory system, a digestive system, a nervous system, a reproductive system. Almost every cell has an immune system. Why is this relevant? Because in truth, a cell is an equivalent of a miniature human being. And so that when I talk about the lives of a cell, I'm talking about the lives of us as well, because we're made out of cells. We can only do what cells can do. And so therefore, if we know how cells work, then we know how we work. Well, when I started teaching, of course, what the main story was the story of DNA. And everyone in the world has this story now about the fact that genes made out of DNA apparently control your life and control your traits. And we talk about the fact that these genes are really passed on from parent to child and carry along the traits with them. So when you're inside of a family that has cancer or Alzheimer's or diabetes, you would expect also that perhaps you will also get these particular diseases. Well, there's a problem with the concept of genetic control, which means control by genes. And the concept is expressed in this Life magazine article, were you born this way? Where your characteristics of not just your physical characteristics, but your emotional characteristics and your behavioral characteristics, are they're controlled by your genes. This is what science was saying. Well, the problem with this is very important because when I was teaching this in a medical school, we called it genetic determinism. That means the genes determine your fate. Well, then all of a sudden you have to stop and say, wait, as far as I know, I didn't pick the genes that I came with. And if I don't like my traits, I can't change the genes that I came with. Well, all of a sudden, if I tell you genes control your life, but you didn't pick them and you can't change them, what does that make you? What it makes you is a victim. You're a victim of heredity. And why is that important? Because when you become a victim and you see yourself as a victim, two very important things happen in our lives. Number one, if I think I'm a victim, then what do I need? I need a rescuer. I need someone to come and rescue me from these things that control my life. And number two, when you see that the genes control your life and you don't, then we become irresponsible. Because we say, well, if I can't do anything about it, then why do I care? And then we give up control over our life because we say, I'm a victim of my genetics. In the story that I was teaching in medical school, it was based on the belief that inside the cell is a large structure called the nucleus, and the nucleus contains the genes and the DNA. And that's why in the textbooks they say the nucleus is equal to the cell's brain. And the reason why? Well, if genes control the characteristics and all the genes are in the nucleus, then the nucleus is the structure where the control comes from. And we call it the brain of the cell, and we say that DNA determines our identity. DNA masterminds our activities. We give up our power over ourselves and accept that the DNA and the genes control everything about us. Well, this is a very interesting concept, that the cell's brain is the nucleus, for a very simple reason. Because if the nucleus controls the functions of the cell, then I have to give a simple point. If I remove the brain from an organism, then naturally what happens is the organism dies. And I say, okay, what if I go into a cell and I remove the nucleus from a cell? Well, the nucleus is the brain of the cell. And I did this work in my own laboratory work at Stanford University, where I took the nuclei out of the cells. And what would you expect? Well, if it's the brain of the cell should die. But in truth, the cell does not die. Many cells live for 2 or more months with no genes in them. And they have their normal life. They breathe, they eat, they defecate, they move around, they communicate with other cells, and none of them have genes in them. And yet we say the genes did all the control, and yet the cell has all the control, but no genes. And all of a sudden, why is that important? Because it says the nucleus is not the brain of the cell. And here's an important fact. This is a fact. Genes do not control biology. And this is very critical because the whole world has been programmed to believe that genes control their life, and it turns out this is not true. And in fact, it was back in 1967, that was 44 years ago, I was cloning stem cells. And back in those days, 44 years ago, there were only a few number of people in the whole world that understood anything about stem cells, maybe 10 or 12 people. And I was working on it, and I was cloning these stem cells. Now, let me tell you what a stem cell is, because every one of you has stem cells in you right now, for a very simple reason. Stem cells are like embryonic cells. Even after you're born, the cells are like embryonic cells. And what is their function? Well, every day you lose billions and billions of your cells. They die from old age, they die from being damaged or used up, and you have to replace your cells. And the question is, well, if you're losing 100 billion cells a day, where are you getting a new 100 billion cells from? And the answer is stem cells. And that's why it's interesting that people think that the pharmaceutical company has to work with your stem cells. And the fact is, no, all of you already have stem cells. If you're alive and you're in this room, of course you've got stem cells. And so what's relevant about stem cells? Well, they're the multi-potential cell. They can become anything in the body. Well, here's what my experiment was that changed my entire life. It's a very simple experiment. What I did is I took one stem cell, just one, and put it in a petri dish by itself. And it would divide every 10 or 12 hours. So after 2 weeks, I'd have thousands of cells in the petri dish. But here's the most important fact. All the cells were genetically identical because they came from the same parent cell. So I have thousands and thousands of twins inside my petri dish. Then here's the experiment. That's not the experiment. Here's the experiment. I go to that petri dish and I take some of those cells out. And I put them into another petri dish, but I changed the environment. The cells live in an environment. They're like fish. They live in a fluid environment. So I changed the chemicals a little bit in the environment. And so I take the cells out of the dish, put them into a dish A with environment A, and the cells form muscle. I go, that's nice. And I go, no, wait. I go back to the same dish, and I take some more cells out, put them in another petri dish with a different environment, with a slightly different chemistry. These cells form bone. And I go, well, wait, not finished. I go back to that same dish, and I take some of those cells out, put it into a third petri dish with a different environment, and the cells form fat cells. Now I ask you a simple but most profound question. What controls the fate of the cells? The environment. It's the only thing that was different. They were all genetically the same. So it says, as you change the environment, then you change the genetic activity. And since they're all exactly the same genes, the fate of the cell is not controlled by the genes in any way whatsoever. The fate of the cell is controlled by the environment. Well, how does it work? Well, I have a cell in a petri dish. When I add my chemicals to the petri dish, it's like raining chemicals on top of the cells. Some of the chemicals stick on the skin of the cell. And what happens is this becomes a signal. And the cell sees the chemical. Now remember, cells are like miniature people. And I say, look what's on your skin. Eyes, ears, nose, taste, all your senses, temperature, pain, pressure. Your skin is reading the environment. The cell's skin reads the environment because cells in humans are the same model. And why is this important? Because when the signal lands on the skin of the cell, then the cell responds by sending another signal inside to control the behavior of the cell. And I say, yeah, but what if the proteins that are necessary to make the behavior, if the proteins are not there, how can I get the proteins to make the behavior? And it turns out, well, if the proteins are not there, the signal goes to the nucleus. And in the nucleus, it activates the genes to get the proteins to make the behavior. Well, this is a whole new branch of science now, because when I did this, this was not understood at the time. But here's how it works. It's understood that the brain of the cell is not the nucleus, it's not the genes. The brain of the cell is the membrane, the skin of the cell. And it's very interesting because if you would understand your own embryology, you would go back and look at the embryo and you would find that the nervous system of the human comes from the skin. And so a cell and a human are, again, exactly alike one another. So your skin is picking up environmental information, and as that information comes in, it controls your behavior, and it also controls your genetics. It becomes very important. So this is a new field of science. And how it works is a signal comes up to the skin of the cell at the top. The signal is then passed to the proteins inside the cell. From one protein to another, the signal is passed. And as you activate the proteins, what you're activating is the behavior of the cell. So the behavior of the cell only is a response to the environment. If I cut off the receptors that read the signals, the cell goes comatose. It does nothing. So the cell's life is a reflection of what's going on in the environment. But since you are the equivalent of cells, your life is dependent upon how you respond to the environment. It changes your behavior and it changes your genetics. Well, this is a new science now, the study of how signals go through the cell. The science is called signal transduction. It's a new concept that says how a signal can come from the environment and go into the cell and activate the behavior of the cell. So this is the new research. We're not studying the genes as much. We're studying the new stuff about the signals. But there's one other special part about signal transduction, because sometimes the signal goes from the cytoplasm into the nucleus of the cell where the genes and the chromosomes are. And these signals control the genetic activity. And this is a new science itself. It's a part of signal transduction, but the new science is called epigenetics. And you say, well, what does epigenetics mean? And it's very profound because it's going to change the entire world that we live in. So this is what it means. When I say genetic control, which is in the textbook, genetic control means control by genes. But now the new science is called epigenetic control. You say, well, what does that mean? Well, the epi, the little EPI in the beginning, means above. So when I say the word epidermis, which means skin, epidermis means above the dermis. So it's the layer above the dermis. It's called the skin. But if epi means above, and I say epigenetic control, then I'm saying control above the genes. And this changes everything because no longer do we recognize that genes make any decisions. All of you have read and heard and read in the newspapers, genes turn on and genes turn off and genes control your life. Well, let me give you a simple fact. A gene is a blueprint, just like an architect has a blueprint. And why is this relevant? Because if you go to an architect's office and she's working on a blueprint, and you lean over the architect and you say, excuse me, is your blueprint on or off? And she would look at you like you're crazy. And the fact is what? Blueprints do not have on and off. Genes do not have on and off. Genes are blueprints. What do you need for a blueprint? You need a contractor. You need someone to read the blueprints. Well, that's what the cell membrane in the nervous system of the cell does. It selects the genes. The genes have no action. They don't turn on, they don't turn off, they're just blueprints. Well, this becomes relevant because I was talking about the fact, well, this is a plastic petri dish with cells in it. And if I change the environment around the cells, I change the fate of the cells. And then I told you in the beginning, I said, no, wait, you have to remember that you are not just a single thing, you're a community of 50 trillion cells. You are skin-covered petri dishes. Inside, under your skin, you have 50 trillion cells in a skin dish. Why is this relevant? Because you have culture medium. You have culture medium that feeds the cells. And as I showed in the experiments, if I change the composition of the culture medium, I change the fate of the cells. So I say, okay, wait, what's your culture medium? And the answer is blood. The blood is the culture medium. The blood has chemistry in the blood. The chemistry in the blood directs the activity of the cell and controls the genetics of the cell. And then you say, well, wait, then what controls the chemistry of my blood? And I'm glad you asked that question. And it works like this. You, like a cell, respond to the environmental signals. You have signals coming from the outside, but you also have signals on the inside. I tell you, but what reads the signals? Well, the nervous system reads the signals. So I say, oh, the function of the brain is perception, meaning to read the environmental signals. I say, yeah, but when it reads the signals, what does it do with it? And I go, it depends on the next thing, your mind. Your mind makes an interpretation of the signals. And when it interprets the signals, the mind sends a signal back to the brain to say, release chemistry that will go to the cells in the blood. And when the chemistry gets to the cells, just like I showed in a plastic petri dish, the chemistry controls the behavior and the gene activity. Well, this becomes very important because it says, as you change your perception, as you change how you interpret the world, you change your chemistry. When you change your chemistry, you change the fate of your cells. I'll give you a simple example of this. Firstly, what's the function of the whole mind? And this is very critical, but very, very important. It goes, the function of the mind is to create coherence or harmony between what you believe and the reality that you experience. So that means whatever you believe, you will create a biology to match your belief. If you believe you're going to get cancer, you can create the chemistry to make cancer. And if you believe you can get well, you can change the chemistry in your body and get rid of the cancer, because your chemistry is coming from the brain, which is interpreted by the mind. So I'm a cell biologist, and yet all of us collectively, we are self-biologists, because we control our own biology. And how does it work? Well, the brain will interpret the world and then release chemicals into the blood, and it's the blood chemicals that are fed to the cells. And let me give you a simple understanding. Let's say you close your eyes, and then I say, open your eyes, and someone you love is in front of you. Well, when someone you love is in front of you, you release different kinds of chemicals like oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, growth hormone. What's interesting about these chemicals? These are the chemicals of health. These are the chemicals that nourish the cells, bring back a maintenance of the body, take care of the system, and energize your body. And I don't need to tell you that, because all you have to do is go back to a point where you fell in love. And I asked you, that moment you fell in love, were you healthy or not? And the answer is, yes, you were profoundly healthy. And I said, did you have energy? You said, oh, I had so much energy, I made love for 5 days without eating food. And I go, yes, because when you release this into your body, this is the chemistry that maintains your health and your energy in your life. But I say, no, wait, same person. I say, wait, close your eyes. But if you open your eyes and see something that scares you, and you're in fear, you release a different set of chemicals. These chemicals here shut down your growth system. They get you ready for fight or flight, getting ready for protection. And that's why when you start to live in fear and you get stressed out, these chemicals shut off the maintenance of the body. That's when people get sick, when they're stressed out. It also shuts off the immune system. Matter of fact, medical doctors use this stress hormone right here, and they give it to patients that have transplanted like a heart or lungs, or you get a transplant from another person. You say, well, why would the medical doctor give them that? And the answer is, because we don't want the patient to reject the graft, the foreign tissue. So we want to shut down their immune system. So they shut down their immune system by giving them stress hormones. But what does that mean about you? Well, every day if you go out and get stressed, then every day you are releasing these hormones into your body, and every day you're shutting down your immune system. And this is really where the illnesses and sickness come from in our lives, for two reasons. Number one, when you're stressed, you shut down the growth and the maintenance of the body. I said you lose 100 billion cells every day. Well, what if you don't replace those cells for a number of days? Well, every day you don't replace the cells is every day you start to get sicker and sicker and sicker. And there's a point where you will die from not replacing the cells. And why would that be? Because these chemicals shut it off. And then I said, well, what about the immune system? And then you say, well, isn't it interesting how stressed people get sick so fast? And you say, well, yes, I got stressed and then I caught a flu. And I'm going to tell you, here's the interesting point. Every one of you right now in this room, if I took a blood sample from any of you, I would show you a very simple fact. Every one of you is already infected with almost all the human pathogens that exist. You already have bacteria, viruses, and parasites in you. It's a natural way of life. But science calls them, and give them a special name, opportunistic organisms. What does it mean? You give them the opportunity, and they're going to take over. And what's the opportunity? The moment you shut off the immune system is when these things start to grow and grow out of control. That's why people get sick. You don't have to catch anything. You already have it. So the issue becomes very important. What's important about this is that your mind controls your biology. And now I'm going to give you, there's two minds. And this is really critical. They're two separate minds. We used to think of them as one mind, but I'm going to tell you, they're two separate entities. The one mind is called the conscious mind. This conscious mind is related to the little growth in the front, right behind your forehead here, called, in science terms, prefrontal cortex. And this is an evolutionary advance. Lower organisms don't have a well-developed prefrontal cortex. This is where your consciousness lies. Well, the consciousness is only the small little piece in the front. I go, yeah, the rest of the brain was already there before consciousness got here. The rest of the brain is called the subconscious, below consciousness. Now, why are these two things separated from each other? Because they mean different things. Let me tell you what they mean. The conscious mind has your personal identity, your source of your spirit. Where does your life emanate from, your personal life? It comes from this prefrontal cortex. This is the seat of your soul or your spirit, really. This is where you have conscious activity. I said, but what is conscious activity? It's creative. Why? Well, think about it this way. If I said to you right now, I said, what do you want out of your life? I said, what do you want next week? What do you want out of your life? Well, it hasn't happened yet, but you can give me an answer. So that means at some level, your conscious mind is creating a future for you. It can also go into the past. The conscious mind could go back into your history. Or the conscious mind could just separate from you while you think of things in your head and not pay attention to what's going on. So here's what's important about the creative mind. It has your wishes, your desires, your aspirations. What do you want from life? That's why I said, if I ask you, what do you want from your life? It's the answer is coming from the conscious mind. This is really cool. It's also the seat of positive thinking. And you go, well, positive thinking, that's got a bad rap. Well, I'm going to explain why positive thinking has problems. Because I'm going to have to talk about the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind is the equivalent of a record playback device. Sort of like the old-fashioned tape player where you push the record button and you speak into it and then you record it, and every time you push play, it repeats the same thing over and over and over again. So basically, the subconscious mind is the habit mind. It's the one where you get habits. And they don't have to be simple habits, they can be very complex habits. So for example, before you had a driver's license, you didn't know how to drive a car. Then you got your permit, and then you had to get in the car, and you had to be very conscious. You had to look out the windows and look at everything. You had to look in the mirrors. You had to look at the gauges. You had to think about the pedals on the floor. You had to take care of your parent who was yelling at you while you were trying to drive. Some people, it's just too much for the conscious mind. They freeze. They can't even drive the car. But then I say, okay, you practice, and you practice driving. Well, what is practice? It makes habit. And I go, well, this is really cool, because when you have habit, then that means you don't have to learn it again. And then it gets to the point, well, how good is this habit? Let me tell you something. It's true for me, and I think it's true for many of you. Have you ever, after driving a car for years, do you ever get in a car and have like a passenger get in the car, and you're driving down the street and you're talking to your passenger, and you're talking and you're talking and you're having a great time talking, and then at some point you look out the window and you realize you haven't paid attention to the road for the last 10 minutes. And I said, well then who was driving the car? And the answer was, not your conscious mind, because your conscious mind was in the discussion. So in fact, what I'm trying to tell you is the habits in the subconscious mind are very complex. They can run your entire life. Most of us, in fact, live only from the subconscious mind habits. So I go, well, wait, I'm going to come back to that story in a minute. So what is in the subconscious mind? Instincts, which you were born with, but then all your experiences that you learned, okay? And especially acquired programs. I said, what do you mean acquired programs? I said, people teach us things. And when they teach us something, it will become part of our habit, and then we will replay whatever they taught us over and over and over again. And so this becomes very critical. And I say, well, here's an important fact. These two minds are not the same size. This mind right here can process, NI means nerve impulses. That means how many nerves are firing into the conscious mind. 40 nerve impulses per second. Well, that might seem like a big number. It's not really big at all. Matter of fact, it's a very small number. That's why you can do a certain number of things consciously, and then if you get one more thing to do, all of a sudden your mind can't do any of it. So it's like if you're in the kitchen cooking, and the kids are playing on the floor, so you're cooking, you're paying attention to that, you're paying attention to the kids, you have the television on, so you're watching the television, the kids, and cooking, right? The phone rings, you pick it up, you're talking to your friend, you're watching television, watching the kids, and you're still cooking. But when the doorbell rings, then it's too much. And why is this important? Because the conscious mind can focus on something, but it can only focus on something small. It can't focus on everything. In contrast, the subconscious mind can process 40 million nerve impulses in the same second. The subconscious mind is 1 million times more powerful than your conscious mind. So that's fact number one. But now I'm going to give you fact number two. It's going to blow your mind. The subconscious mind. Okay. Science has now recognized an important fact. And the fact is this. We don't use the two minds equally at all. That in fact, what we now recognize is this. We are conscious of only about 5% of our cognitive activity. What does that mean? It says you are only controlling your life with your conscious mind at most 5%. I said, yeah, but then who's controlling the rest of my life? The answer is the subconscious mind. I go, why is that important? Because I go back and I say, well, this is the mind that has what you want. This is the one that has your wishes and your desires and positive thinking. And I go, yeah, it's really cool, except it only works 5% of the time. That works 95% of the time. And why is it relevant? Because I said, well, how much of your life are you creating from your wishes and desires? Little tiny bit. Most of your life is coming from this subconscious mind. Not only is it 1 million times more powerful, but it controls over 95% of your life. And you say, okay, this is interesting. I know that my wishes and desires come from here, but where did I get these programs from? Because these are the programs that control your life, not these. I go, well, where'd you get them from? Well, the new science of epigenetics firstly says what? The environment controls the genes. So I go back to a fetus that's growing inside the womb. And I say, well, what environment does the fetus read? The fetus is going to respond to the environment, and I'm going to adjust the genetics. I say, well, what environment does it read? And the answer is simple. It's the mother's environment. I go, well, why is that important? Because when I was teaching in medical school at the time, when we believed that genes controlled everything, then we said, well, what's the role of the mother? And they said, oh, the role of the mother is she provides nutrition and genetics controls the development. So that's all we used to tell women, what do you need to know to be a good mother? You say, well, eat well, take vitamins and minerals, exercise. Why? Because this will get better nutrition to your child. And then I asked a very simple question. Is nutrition the only thing that's in blood? And the answer is no. What's in the blood? The emotional chemicals are in the blood. The hormones that regulate the woman's physiology and her biology, all the chemicals that are coming from her brain are also going into the fetus. And why has this become important? Because at this point, what we start to recognize is that the mother's perception of the world and what she believes and what she has in her mind actually sends the chemistry not only to control her body, but sends the chemistry in to the body of the fetus as well. And so the mother is nature's Head Start program. It's very simple because nature was very intelligent. Nature said very simply this. She said, how do I know what the world's going to be like when this sperm and this egg come together to create a new baby? Because the world is always changing. So how can nature prepare or plan ahead to tell what genetics this child should have active when this child is conceived? Because the world is always changing. And why is this then relevant? Because nature depends on the mother to interpret the world and then send the signals back into the child and control the genetics of her child. So if the mother is stressed, it changes the genetics of the child. And it changes the whole aspect of the life of this child. And so it becomes very important to recognize the mother is not just providing nutrition, the mother is providing information that will lead the child to better develop the genetics that it will need to live in the world. And if the mother has a misperception about the world, well then the genetics of her child are now misconnected. The wrong genes are being activated. If the mother is in fear and in stress, she's going to shut down the growth of her own child. Stressed mothers have babies of much lower weight. Why? Because not only is her body shutting down, but her fetus's body is shutting down. Her immune system is shutting down, so is the fetus immune system shutting down. Why this becomes important? Mothering is a very important contribution to the whole world and to civilization. Because how she sees the world determines how her child will grow up and respond to the world. The health of her child, the health of the civilization, not only the health of her child, but guess what? The health of her child's child will also be affected by the mother. So we now find that these belief issues go back and forth like this. I just realized that there's a little bit of sound on this next video. Give me a second. I address this earphone. I'm going to see if Barrett will allow me to, if I play this earphone, here's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to show a video. It was made in Italy. So if you don't speak Italian, it won't make any difference. I'll tell you why. It shows a sonogram of a baby responding to an argument between the mother and the father. It was a setup, but I want to show you the response, and I think this microphone will pick it up, but you can watch it. But what I want you to see is the response of the fetus as the mother is going through the argument. One more time. Every time the mother got excited, the fetus jumped. What's the point? The mother and the fetus are one. If the mother is happy, the fetus is happy. If the mother is stressed, so basically what we're learning is this, is that the role of the mother is critical to the role of our civilization because she is programming the genetics of her own child. lifetime action. The genes don't control the child, the environment controls it, but the mother is the Head Start program because she's the one that reads the environment, interprets the environment, and sends the interpretation to her fetus who is growing inside. And then all of a sudden I say, okay, well that's real important because what does it represent? Well, I'll give you a fact. It is now recognized that half of our personality is developed before we are born. It is developed because of the patterns that are repeated over in the mother. And this is not to separate the father from this at all, for a very important reason. Because if the father screws up, it really messes up the mother's physiology. So it's the couple. And if they can create harmony and peace around the development of their child, they will create a healthy, strong child. And that's really important for us to know. But then I say, well, that's only a small percentage of our programming. Where does the rest of it come from? And this is where it comes from. And this is really the important part that I want to emphasize. It goes like this. When a child is born, the EEG, which is electrical activity of the brain, for the first year and a half or so, it's in the lowest frequency called delta. If you have your brain in delta at this age, you will either be sleeping or unconscious. But the child is neither sleeping or unconscious. The issue is the nervous system of the child develops not all at the same time. The inputs develop before the outputs, meaning a child can respond and know what's going on but doesn't have the muscle coordination to make an output. That's why children cry a lot. They're very frustrated. They understand everything, but they have no coordination to get it out. And so basically a child is like behind a plate glass window. It can observe everything, but it cannot participate because it doesn't have the coordination. But then, at 2 years, it begins to get a new brain activity called theta. Theta is the equivalent of hypnosis. And why is this important? Because this is where the child learns programming. I'll come back to this in a minute because it's important. By age 6, it then ramps up the electrical activity of the brain, expresses the next higher level of activity called alpha, which is calm consciousness. Calm conscious. The child becomes conscious after 6. And by 12, it jumps up to the next higher level, beta, which is highly focused energy and highly focused consciousness. This is why education changes between 6 to here, then we change and go to higher education because the brain is now capable of doing higher education. But if you looked at this, the most important thing you could say is, wait, the child is not conscious for the first 6 years of its life. It means it's taking in data, but it's not coordinating and thinking and creating with the conscious mind. It's just downloading data. And so why is this important? Because it's the first 6 years of a life of a child, which was us, where we got programmed to fit into the society. We become enculturated. We learn the rules of how to be a member of the community, how to be a member of the family. How does a child learn the rules? And the answer is, it's in hypnosis. All it has to do is observe. Everything the child observes goes straight down into the subconscious mind. So if you're a boy, you observe your father and see how he responds to everything. You learn his responses because you just download them. You're a girl, you focus on your mother and do the same kind of thing. So in other words, the fundamental programs in your subconscious are not your programs. They came from your family and your community. And why is this important? Well, then go back and listen. 95% of our life comes from the subconscious, not the conscious. That means you're not living your life, you're repeating your parents' life. And is relevance to this? Well, they find that when they looked at the children who were adopted into families that have cancer, that the adopted child will get this cancer with the same propensity as any of the natural siblings in the family, even though the child came from different genetics. That we're beginning to find out that cancer, only 10% of cancer is hereditary. 90% of cancer is due to lifestyle. And most of that is due to the invisible subconscious. And here's one more thing. You also learn self-identity. Who are you? Well, how do you know who you are? Because people told you in the first 5 or 6 years of your life who you are. They would say, oh, you're not smart enough, you're not good enough. Who do you think you are? You don't deserve this. You're not lovable. When parents are saying that, they don't mean it. They're trying to, stick a pin in the child to get them to activate. But they don't realize The child isn't conscious and thinking about what the parent is saying. The child is just recording what the parent is saying. If you were in a family where you got repeated, not good enough, you don't deserve things, you're sickly. If you got that repeated in the first 6 years, and then now you're 50 years old, and I say, yeah, but what's controlling your life? 95% of your life came from the subconscious. And here's the problem. It's invisible to us when we do the subconscious behavior. That's why it's called subconscious. And I go, yeah, let me give you a story, because most people relate to the story. Very simple. I imagine sometime back in your history you had a friend that was very close to you, and you knew your friend's behavior. And you happen to know your friend's parent. And you recognize that your friend sometimes shared the same behavior as their parent. So one day you say casually, you go, you know, Bill, you're just like your dad. And all of a sudden, Bill's the first person to go, how can you compare me to my dad? There's two profound points to that one little story. Profound point number one, listen. Everyone else can see that Bill behaves like his dad. Who's the one that doesn't see it? Bill. And profound point number two, you ready for this one? We are all Bill. Every one of us is engaged in behaviors that we do not see. And it's these invisible behaviors that sabotage us. Because psychologists will tell you that 70% or more of the programs that you got from your parents are limiting, disempowering, and self-sabotaging. And why is that important? Because then 95% of your life, you are engaged in these behaviors and you don't even see that you're doing them. And then you wonder why your life doesn't work out the way you want. And I say, well, what is it you want? I say, well, that's what's in the conscious mind. And you say, yeah, but all my wishes and desires, they don't seem to show up. I'm having trouble getting them. I'm saying, well, the reason why you're having trouble getting them is because you can't see the invisible behavior that you're sabotaging yourself with, because it's subconscious. And so most of us then feel like we're victims of the world, that, oh my goodness, I really wanted to be successful, I wanted to have a great relationship, but I can't get there. Oh, you know, the universe is against me. I got a bad hand of the cards in my life. And so we all of a sudden discount that we were even involved in our own lives. And yet it turns out all of us are creating our lives all the time. And then I want to tell you before we end this section of one interesting fact. I go back to that point where you fell in love. If you could just go back in your mind to a time where you fell head over heels in love with somebody. I already asked you, I said, were you healthy? And the answer is, yeah, I was healthy. I said, do you have energy? Yeah, I had energy. Was life so good you couldn't wait for the next day? And the answer is, yeah. And was I say, well then wasn't it like living heaven on earth when you fell in love? And the people go, yeah. And then I want to tell you something. That was not an accident, that was a creation. You did that. You created the honeymoon. I said, well, how'd you create the honeymoon? And now it's something that I've also found, I've been talking about it for years, but science just this year recognized the same fact. When you're in love, you stay in the conscious mind, and you don't go into the subconscious mind. You stay present. It's called Buddhist mindfulness. It's being present, be here now. Why? Because if you keep your mind focused on the current moment, then you can make the decisions from your conscious mind, the ones with wishes, desires, and positive thinking. But since only 5% of our normal life is there, that's why we have trouble getting it. And yet the reality is this, if you understand this, you can change the programming in the subconscious mind to match the programming in your conscious mind. And I would say, well, what would happen if you did that? And the answer is very simple. Life would be heaven on earth for you. It would be like being in that honeymoon state for the rest of your life. You would be creating from that positive wishing and desires and aspirations because you wouldn't go back to the default of the other programs. Now, before I close this section, it would also be very helpful to say, you can reprogram that stuff. Because if you couldn't reprogram it, this would be a lousy lecture at this point. And there's a whole new modality of psychology called energy psychology. And why is it important? Because it basically reveals how you can change the programming in the subconscious mind in minutes. He said in minutes, but some people have gone to psychologists and psychiatrists for years. And I say, cool, you know what happened then? They sat there in that room, and their conscious mind learned all the reasons why their life sucks. Oh yeah, your mother did this, and your father did this, and your best friend did that. And you sit there with tissues, and you cry, and you go, oh, my life, my poor life, oh, it's so bad. And then at the end, you say, oh, now I know why my life is so bad. And then I say, yeah, but did it change? And the answer is no. And the reason I'm going to give you is very important. The conscious mind is not just a separate mind, but it learns differently. The conscious mind, being creative, can learn from reading a self-help book. A conscious mind can go to a lecture and learn information in the lecture. The conscious mind could study and learn all this kind of stuff. Does that translate into the subconscious mind? No, because the subconscious mind is a habit mind. And it doesn't learn from this. That's why you could read the self-help book, and I give you a test, and you get 100, and you still say, yeah, but my life is still the same. It didn't change, even though I know all this stuff. And the reason why? Because what you know is now in your conscious mind, but never went into your subconscious mind. If it doesn't go into subconscious mind, it's basically useless because you still have the same programs you had before. So the issue is, can I get the programs in the subconscious mind? And the answer is yes. It's through a process equivalent to super learning. And there are different modalities. The one that I'm most familiar with, because it's the one that changed my entire life, is a process called Psych-K. Now, I want to just allot 2 minutes before the break to let my friend Lars come up and mention something about Psych-K, just 2 minutes, because you may want to be interested in this, because this is one of the most fabulous ways of reprogramming the limiting beliefs in your subconscious mind in just minutes. And so I really look forward to what Lars would say, and just introduce Lars. Thank you.
Vi har satt opp et kurs i Bymedia den 17-18. juni for i løpet av 2 dager lære et sett med enkle prosesser som tillater å kommunisere det vi bevisst velger med den kreative forstand, med den som vet hva vi vil og hva vi ønsker å skape, til underbevisstheten, slik at livet blir et levende eksempel på det vi ønsker å skape, det vi ønsker å bringe ut og være et levende eksempel på. Og det å være den som vi har kommet hit for å være i dette livet. Takk for nå.